Hi, my name is Rhonda Slater. I am founder of Pierced by Love, which exists to bring believers into a closer, intimate walk with Jesus through corporate encounters, small group discipleship, and individual Christian life coaching. Thank you so much for coming and listening today. This is our fourth in a series of 4 where we're talking about how to love God with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. The first of the series talks about connecting the verses where Jesus said, love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, with Paul's exhortation to Timothy in Timothy 1. Then in the second of the series, it talks about how to have a pure heart. In the third, it talks about how to have a good conscience. And in this session, we're talking about how to have a sincere faith. So if you have not seen those other 3 podcasts, I highly recommend that you go back and watch those. They will make all of this make sense to you, and it will help you to put all of these pieces together so that they can work together to bring you into the place where you can love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. So thank you for coming today. Let me start off by reading that verse in 1 Timothy. It's 1 Timothy 1:5. Paul says, the aim of our charge, the goal, right? The final goal, the thing we're looking at. The aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. So we're going to talk about the sincere faith today. And having a pure heart and a good conscience is what's going to equip you to grow your faith. So go back and watch those other podcasts. Let's talk about that original word, faith. In the Greek is pistis. And what that means, it means to have a persuasion towards something. The root means to assent. It means to be convinced by argument. It means to have evidence or authority on something. It means to trust or to yield. And it also applies not only to initial faith or initial salvation. You have faith for initial salvation, but then you have an ongoing faith, a constancy in faith that's continuing to grow you and mature you in the things of the Lord. The first time that word faith is used is in Matthew 8. Do you remember the story of the centurion? He sends his messengers to Jesus, and they tell him that that he has a servant that's sick. And the centurion recognizes that Jesus has authority, because the centurion has natural authority, right? He has authority in the world. Like he tells a man to go or come, and the man goes and comes. But he recognizes that his authority stops when it comes to healing the sick. But he realizes that Jesus has that authority. And so he calls upon Jesus to exercise his authority over this spirit or over this illness and sickness. And this is how Jesus responds. When Jesus heard it, he marveled, and he said to them that followed, verily I say unto you, I have not found so great a faith, no, not in Israel. That's Matthew 8:10. He marvels at his faith because the centurion recognizes he can see something that's not seen. He has faith for that. That's so great. You know, I had to have faith when I began to do deliverance ministry. In fact, I had to have faith to even enter into my own freedom, to get my own deliverance. I had to believe that was going to help me, that was going to improve my life, that was going to help walk me into the things that the Lord had for me. And then when I began doing ministry on others, I had to believe that what Jesus had done for me through someone else, he would do through me to help others. And I had to lay down my pride. I had to lay down what people thought of me. I had to lay down my fear of doing something wrong. I had to lay down control of what I thought things should look like. And I just started doing what Jesus called me to do. And there weren't a lot of outward signs at first that things were going well. I just knew God was calling me to it. And I had to keep walking it out by faith until finally I was getting feedback from people I ministered to that their lives were changed. I started seeing people manifest whenever I would command demons to go from them. I started seeing the power outwardly, but I didn't always see that. There was a place where I had to walk that out in faith, and my faith had to grow in order to see the outward signs that what I was doing was actually influencing the spirit realm. You know, faith, you might have heard, is spelled R-I-S-K. It's a risk. You've got to throw away your dignity sometimes. You've got to put away what people think of you, and you've just got to walk forward in what God is calling you to do. Faith opens our heart to receive something. Like it opened my heart to receive ministry. In turn, I received freedom. Jesus said to the woman who touched his hem, "Your faith has made you whole." Sometimes he told people, "According to your faith, be it unto you." When you're trying to hand out something that's free and somebody says, "Oh, no, thank you, I don't want that," are you going to force it on them? I mean, you might try to convince them a little bit, right? But Jesus is not a controlling person. He doesn't operate in control. He allows us to have free will. Faith is using your free will to decide that you want something that Jesus has to offer. Think of the father that came to the disciples, and his son was demonized, and the disciples couldn't cast it out. So he brings the boy to Jesus, right? And he says that they couldn't cast it out. And, you know, sometimes I think we read that as Jesus is just like, "Oh my goodness, you guys, what am I ever going to do with you?" Well, a fruit of the Spirit is patience. And so I think that probably the way Jesus responded was a little more patient than sometimes we make it out to be. But that could be a whole other podcast, right? But what he says to them is that they had some unbelief that had kept them from doing what they were trying to do. And he said that this kind only comes out by prayer and fasting. And beloved, I think he's talking about the unbelief. I don't believe he's talking about the demons. So if you have unbelief, the best way to improve that is to get closer to God, to know him. And how do you do that? Through prayer and fasting. When I was in the midst of my freedom journey, when I was in the real ditches of it, I would speak to the Lord. I would listen to the Lord. I would communicate. I was getting visions from him. He was leading me into some very deep heart healing. And as I communed with him, I got to know him, and I started to feel the reality of who he was within me. I started feeling his peace, his joy. That's what prayer should do for you. Prayer should bring you into a place where you're getting to know God. You're spending time with him. And then your belief starts to increase. So imagine belief is a sports car in your garage. And you know you've got a sports car out there in your garage, but you've never gotten in it and drove it. You've never taken it for a spin to see what it can do. So faith is a lot like that you may believe there's a God, and you go to church. You know that there's a sports car in the garage. So you're going to church, you're doing the things, right? But you've never actually taken a step of faith to challenge what it is you believe. So you get in the car and you take it for a spin. And you see how powerful it is, how fast it can go, how sharp it can take turns. And let's say you wreck. Because you're just learning to drive. You're just learning to navigate this new faith, right? So would you say that faith doesn't work? Would you say that the car was not good because you wrecked it? No, you wouldn't say that, right? So as you're walking out faith, and some things don't happen the way you think they should happen, it doesn't mean you were wrong. It means that you're learning, and you need to keep driving. You need to keep going. You need to keep growing, because that's how you learn. Is sometimes you mess up, or sometimes you just have an expectation that was different than the expectation that God had. Faith is an art. It's not a formula. Think about that. It's an art. It's not a formula. So just because you do certain things, just because you got in the car and you put the key in, you turned the ignition, you backed out of the driveway, you drove down the street, you did those things, it doesn't mean it's going to work out perfectly every time. It's an art. You're learning. Just like having a relationship with God is an art. It's not always going to be perfect. You're listening to him, and sometimes you're going to get it right, and sometimes you're going to misunderstand a little bit, and that's okay. Does that mean we quit listening to him? That's not what that means at all. It means we keep growing and we keep learning. In Matthew 23:23, Jesus called faith a weightier matter of the law, along with judgment and mercy, right? He's talking to the Pharisees, and he's telling them that those are a weightier matter of the law, and that they've neglected them, is what he's telling them. The law was actually made to draw you into relationship with God. But God realized it wouldn't work. He knew it wouldn't work. He wanted to show us that we fall short. Have you ever had your children outside and you told them not to play in the street? Why did you tell them not to play in the street? Because it was dangerous. It was not a good place for them. It would get them hurt. That's why God has the law. He's telling them to do things or not to do things because they're helpful and keep them from partnering with the enemy to do hurtful things in their life. Now, you can follow the law, so to speak, in two ways. You can just do it because it's written and that's what you're supposed to do. That was the Pharisees' story. Or you can turn on your heart and you can posture it towards God, and you can do the law because you love him and you want your life to be abundant. But the good news for us New Testament believers who have Jesus is the law is written on your heart. And I talk about that in the series about good conscience. The law is written on your heart. So think about those two things. You can do disciplines, right? Following the law just to do them and not have your heart engaged. Or you can have your heart engaged and you can do these things out of love, let them just flowing out of you because you love God, and you can keep growing in him. Think of when Jesus was in the synagogue and people were putting offerings in the bucket or whatever they had back then. And they saw the Pharisees, the disciples and Jesus saw the Pharisees putting all this money, all this, I think they gave herbs and stuff back then. I don't know, all these resources they're putting into the tithe bucket, right? And then this widow comes along and she puts the last 2 coins, everything she had, into that bucket. Jesus didn't look at her and say, "Good job, you followed the law," right? He saw her heart. He saw her faith. He saw her engaged with the Lord, trusting him. It was a prophetic act that I'm going to put these in there because I believe you. I trust you. You're going to provide for me. When I first started walking out my faith, I just started in where my church needed help and what I felt like I could give. So I began being a greeter. I began teaching children's church. And those are great positions, and they don't indicate a person's spiritual maturity. They were just places where, for me, I felt comfortable at the time. I had small children at the time, so I felt comfortable teaching children about Jesus. I loved people, so I felt comfortable being a greeter. But I just did those things trying to do what was right. And that's great. Sometimes it takes those steps of faith to just walk it out with the Lord. And isn't he good? He is the he's the pillar of cloud by day. He is the pillar of fire by night. And when you're just walking out your faith, he is faithful to put himself in front of you and guide you where you need to go. Well, I was sitting and I was having quiet time with the Lord in that season, and things started happening. Supernatural things started happening. Sensations started happening in my body. I couldn't really explain them, but I knew they were God. And I was seeking hard after him to find out why I was experiencing these things. And I ended up at a Bible college, not like a seminary, but more like a supernatural school of ministry, I guess you would say. And I saw things happening that I had never seen before. But why did I end up at that school in the first place? I already had a college degree. I had no reason in the natural to go there. It wasn't that I was trying to seek a a better job. I wasn't going back to school to increase my education. I went back to this school to find God. I went by faith that God was going to use this. I felt he was drawing me there. And not only just drawing me to this school, he was drawing me to study evangelism. Beloved, I was afraid to invite somebody to church. So it was incredible to think that he wanted me to study evangelism there, but I knew it. When I would watch videos of their evangelism team going out, I would just start weeping. I knew it was where God wanted me to go. So I took that step of faith. I went to that Bible college for a year. I went out on the street and I evangelized to people, and it broke off fear. It broke off all kinds of stuff, the lies of the enemy. People don't want to hear that. You're going to make a fool of yourself. You don't know enough. All of that fell away because I just started loving people and I started growing. So those steps in faith grew me. Faith grows in obedience. Obedience kind of sometimes has a bad connotation, I think. We think of, oh, I don't get to do what I want to do. I have to obey someone else. But obedience in God's eyes in the kingdom is his invitations to draw you to deeper intimacy with him, to draw you into higher things of the kingdom, to move you into purpose and identity of who you were created to be. God is not a controlling God. In fact, he says in 1 Corinthians 13 that love is not self-seeking, it doesn't seek its own way. It doesn't look to control people. You know, when I said earlier that relationship with God was an art and not a formula, well, it's like that from God's eyes too. Relationship with us is an art and not a formula. We are way too multifaceted for that. We're way too dynamic for that. And of course, we have patterns and things like that where God he knows what we're going to do, right? But he loves the art of relationship with us. In fact, he calls us his masterpiece. And he loves to keep molding and shaping us until we're walking out the fullness of who we were created to be in him. So let go of your fear. Let go of control. I'm not saying be irresponsible, but sometimes it takes a leap of faith. Beloved, if you're trying to control everything in your life, I want to tell you that God has more for you than you can think or imagine. So if you're trying to control things, you're actually settling for way less than what he has for you. Stop self-belittling. Stop false humility. You have the God of the impossible inside of you. Come to grips with the fact that he wants to take you to high places, that you can only get there with him, in partnership with him. Keep growing your faith so that you know you can do impossible things. And pretty soon you're going to be driving that sports car like a professional. You're going to be driving better and better. You're going to walk in power. You're going to walk in love. You're going to feel the peace and the joy and all of the fruit of the Spirit within you. And there'll be no stopping you. Thank you, my friends, for listening today. I pray that this podcast has blessed you. If you would like to connect with us, visit piercedbylove.com. You can contact us. We have some resources for purchase and also for free on our website. So I hope you'll check that out. But I pray that you learned that a pure heart brings you to healing, that a good conscience brings you into growth, and that walking out faith brings out your identity in God. Blessings.